This is K.M. Weiland, and you are listening to the 180th episode of the Wordplay Podcast. Looks like we all survived 2012. It was another busy year on the writing front for me. Between the Outlining Your Novel workshop I put together for Writers Digest University and Dreamlanders publication early this month, I kept hopping. But 2013 is shaping up to be even hoppier. My writing goals include finishing my latest rewrite of The Deepest Breath and finishing research for Storming and starting its first draft. I'm also excited to get to announce that F&W Media, home of Writers Digest magazine, among other things, has asked me to write a book for them. The book will be one of the first in their new series of classic novels annotated especially for writers. It's tentatively titled Jane Eyre, the Classic, annotated for writers and readers, and is scheduled for release July 2014. Should you slam your story's brakes? The latest post in the video series on my blog cautions against allowing your story's ticking clock to speed things up too much. To watch it, visit my website at www.helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. New videos are posted every Wednesday. And now, I hope you enjoyed this week's podcast, the fourth in the series Structuring Your Story's Scenes. This installment is titled Options for Conflict in a Scene. Once you've established your character's scene goal, the fun begins in earnest. Conflict is what story is all about. Without it, the character would achieve his goal in minutes, all the loose ends would instantly be tied off with a pretty red bow, and the story would be happily ever over. That may be nice for the folks in your story, but it's going to bore readers into rigor mortis. Enter the opposition, stage left. Here's your character, merrily skipping along toward his goal of contributing to the annual Christmas Children's Charity, when bammo! Bandits swarm the road, block off access to the goal, and demand the character hand over all his money. Ta-da! Instantly, your scene becomes more interesting. Readers are breathless to discover if your character will escape the bandits and deliver his charity donation to the poor little orphans. Conflict keeps your story moving forward. We say no conflict, no story because without conflict, the story comes to an end. When the character's initial goal is stymied by conflict, it causes him to react with a new goal, which is stymied by further conflict, which causes him to again modify his goal, and on until finally he reaches the goal and the story ends. Surprisingly, authors sometimes have a difficult time injecting enough conflict into their stories. Their characters mosey along, getting along with everyone, and doing nothing of great importance. Or, if they do have an altercation with someone or accomplish something important, the ramifications are resolved so quickly and seamlessly that they end up being neither crucial nor entertaining. Don't be afraid of socking it to your characters. Without conflict and its associated suffering, characters have no reason to exist. Analyze your scenes to ensure each one erects obstacles between your character and his goal. Like scene goals, scene conflict offers endless possibilities. Conflict can come in a variety of flavors, but most can be sorted into the following categories. 1. Direct opposition, such as another character, weather, etc., which interferes and prevents the protagonist from achieving his goal. 2. Inner opposition. The character learns something that changes his mind about his goal. 3. Circumstantial difficulties, such as no flour to bake a cake, no partners to dance with, etc. 4. Active conflict. An argument, a fight, etc. 5. Passive conflict, such as being ignored, being kept in the dark, being avoided, etc. These generalities can include, but certainly aren't limited to, 1. Physical altercations. 2. Verbal altercations. 3. Physical obstacles, such as weather, roadblocks, personal injuries, etc. 4. Mental obstacles, such as fear, amnesia, etc. 5. Physical lack, such as no flour to bake a cake. 6. Mental lack, such as no information. 7. Passive aggression, whether it's intentional or unintentional. 8. Indirect interference, such as long distance or unintentional opposition by another character. As if we don't have enough to keep us busy just in dreaming up a good altercation, we also have to limit our conflict to only what is integral to each specific scene. In the words of Dwight V. Swain, conflict for conflict's sake isn't good enough. If the charitable character in our original illustration loses his donation money to bandits, that's probably a good conflict. It directly interferes with his goal of giving the money to the orphans, but if the bandits never show up again in the story, if they appeared solely for the sake of stealing the money, they're not going to represent integral conflict. Even worse is when the conflict has nothing to do with the goal. If Allie is walking down the street intent on getting to her hair appointment before her debut performance on Broadway, a random argument about the worth and importance of the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade just ain't gonna cut it. Instead, we have to ensure each scene's conflict is a direct result of an earlier occurrence in the plot. Maybe our protagonist infuriated the bandit leader by throwing a snowball in his face. It also has to be a direct obstacle between the character and his goal. Maybe the Macy's parade is preventing Allie from reaching her hair appointment. Once you've identified your scene's conflict, stop and ask yourself the following questions. 1. Does the opposition to the character's goal matter to him? If not, he doesn't want the goal badly enough in the first place. 2. Does the conflict organically evolve from the goal? 3. Is the opposition's motivation logical within the overall story? 4. Does the conflict lead to a logical outcome, resolution, or disaster? 5. Does the conflict directly interfere with or threaten the protagonist's goal? So how does effective scene conflict manifest in successful stories? Let's take another look at our chosen books and movies. Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. In the first chapter, Mrs. Bennet's goal is to get her husband to call upon Mr. Bingley so their daughters may later be introduced to this eligible young man. Her goal is impeded by Mr. Bennet's passive resistance to her nagging. The conflict takes the form of a verbal altercation. Even though it's not an outright argument and certainly isn't violent or even aggressive, it still offers conflict simply because the two characters are obviously at odds. If Mr. Bennet were to immediately give in to Mrs. Bennet's desires, why certainly, Blossom, I'd be overjoyed to visit Mr. Bingley since you're so keen on it. The scene would be instantly and yawn-inducingly over. It's a Wonderful Life, directed by Frank Capra. The opening scene's conflict comes in the form of the angel Clarence's incompetence. The goal of Joseph, his superior angel, is to send Clarence down to earth to save George Bailey. But not only is Clarence late and worrisome in his ineptitude, he's also unable to see Joseph's narration of George's past. This is a very minor conflict, and one that's overcome, at least partially, with ease, since all Joseph has to do is help Clarence see the past. But it serves not only to spice up the scene, but also to demonstrate key facets of Clarence's character. Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. In the first chapter, Ender's goal is simple enough. He just wants to get to the school bus and go home. But conflict immediately arises in the form of Stilson and other bullies who try to impede Ender's progress. The conflict arises naturally from the characters and from the plot, since the bullies are taunting Ender about the loss of his monitor. But it goes far beyond conflict for conflict's sake. This first altercation not only aptly demonstrates important character qualities within the protagonist, it also leads into a disaster that will figure prominently throughout the book and ultimately foreshadow the climax. Master and Commander: The Far Side of the World, directed by Peter Weir. Conflict arises in the first scene when the midshipman, Mr. Hallam, wavers in his decisiveness about whether or not he spotted the enemy ship Acheron. This opening scene is primarily confined to Hallam's inner conflict, which is illustrated through a terse exchange of words between him and another midshipman. The conflict neatly dramatizes important facets of shipboard life, sets up the overall conflict of Surprise versus Acheron, and foreshadows Hallam's character arc. Conflict is arguably one of the easiest and most enjoyable parts to write in any story. So long as you properly set up the conflict within each scene, your story will chug along, almost under its own power. Thank you for listening to the Wordplay Podcast. To read a transcript of this episode, you can visit my website at helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. And be sure to check back again next week.